You ever wake up and realize someone moved your property while you were sleeping? The smell hit me before I even opened the truck door. Fresh-cut pine and wet soil, sharp and out of place like a lie that hadn't dried yet. I stood there, keys still in my hand, staring at my fence line. Or what used to be my fence line. 6 feet. That's how far they moved it. 6 feet of land. Mine, gone overnight like it had never belonged to me. The new posts were perfectly aligned, machine set, clean steel brackets still shining in the early Texas sun. Whoever did this didn't just move a fence. They rewrote a boundary. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked the new line slowly, measuring it in steps like my father taught me. 1, 2, 3, each step tightening something in my chest. Because I knew this land. Every inch of it. I knew where the oak roots twisted under the soil, where the rainwater pooled after a storm, where the old survey marker sat buried just beneath the grass like a quiet witness. And now it was on the wrong side of my own fence. I crouched down, brushing dirt away with my fingers until the cold edge of that marker touched my skin. Still there. Still exactly where it had always been. Which meant only one thing. They didn't move the land. They moved the lie around it. A low hum echoed from across the road. Golf cart engine, smooth and smug. I didn't have to look up to know who it was. Rebecca Thornfield, HOA president. Professional smile, polished voice, and the kind of authority that only exists because no one's challenged it yet. "Oh good, you're out early," she called, like this was some casual morning chat and not a property line violation. I stood up slowly, wiping the dirt from my hands, letting the silence hang just long enough to make her shift in her seat. "You moved my fence," I said. No accusation, just fact. She smiled wider, the kind of smile that's practiced in mirrors. "We adjusted the boundary to align with the updated community layout. It's all been documented." Documented. That word hung in the air heavier than the smell of fresh wood. Because people like Rebecca always believe paperwork made things true. I glanced past her, toward the front entrance of the neighborhood. I'd seen the construction starting last week. New stone pillars. Expanded driveway. A bigger, cleaner, more premium look for Willowbrook Estates. What I hadn't said out loud, what I hadn't needed to, was where that expansion line ran. Right through my land. 6 feet and wasn't random. It was calculated, planned, approved, and executed while I was supposed to stay quiet. I nodded once, like I was accepting it. Like I was just another homeowner who didn't know better. Rebecca relaxed instantly. You could see it in her shoulders, the way she leaned back slightly, already filing this underhandled. "It's really for the good of the community," she added, that same polished tone, like she was doing me a favor. I looked at that fence again. Clean cuts, straight lines, perfect work. They didn't rush this. They took their time, which meant I could take mine too. Because here's the thing my father used to say while we walked this exact property line. Never stop a man while he's making a mistake, especially if he's putting it in writing. I slipped my hands into my pockets, nodding again like none of this bothered me. Like I hadn't already noticed where their brand new entrance was sitting. Like I hadn't already checked the original survey twice. "Yeah," I said quietly, turning back toward the house. "Looks real nice." And that's the moment she thought she won. What she didn't know? I wasn't losing land. I was letting her build the evidence. I did not call a lawyer that day. I did not call the police either. Instead, I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with the windows open, letting the smell of fresh-cut lumber drift in like a reminder that someone out there thought they had already finished this story. Steam curled up from the mug in my hand while I pulled out the old survey folder, the same worn manila envelope my father used to keep locked in his desk drawer. The paper inside felt different from anything printed today, thicker, almost stubborn, like it refused to be ignored. I spread it out across the table, flattening the creases with my palm, and there it was again. Every line, every measurement, every boundary exactly where it had always been. I traced the edge of the property with my finger, slow and deliberate, until I reached the front corner. That was where things got interesting, because that was where their new entrance sat now. Not all of it, just enough to matter. I leaned back in the chair, listening to the low hum of construction equipment in the distance. They were still working on it. Of course they were. People like Rebecca did not do things halfway. If she was going to take 6 feet, she was going to turn it into something visible, something permanent, something that made her look like she improved the neighborhood. I stepped outside again around noon. The sun was higher now, burning off the morning chill, and the air carried that mix of dust and diesel that always comes with new construction. Across the street, crews were setting stone. Large limestone blocks, clean edges, stacked with precision. A wide entrance was taking shape, framed by two pillars that were just a little too far apart to be entirely on HOA land. I could see it clearly from where I stood. Most people would not notice, but I did, because I knew where that invisible line ran beneath the dirt. One of the workers glanced at me, then went back to his job. To them, this was just another project. Another set of instructions signed off by someone with authority. I did not blame them. They were building what they were told to build. The problem was not the hands doing the work. It was the signature that approved it. I walked closer, stopping just far enough to not interrupt. The ground near the base of the right pillar was still loose, darker than the surrounding soil. Fresh. I nudged it lightly with the tip of my boot, feeling how soft it was compared to the packed earth on my side of the original line. That difference told me everything. They had crossed it. Not by accident. Not by inches. By design. You like what we are doing with the place? Rebecca's voice came from behind me again, smooth as ever, like she had been rehearsing that exact line. I turned slowly. She was standing there with a clipboard this time, sunglasses resting perfectly on her face, like she was inspecting progress on a project she already considered hers. Looks expensive, I said. That was all. No anger. No argument. Just an observation. Her smile widened slightly, pleased. It adds value, she replied. For everyone. I nodded again, letting my gaze drift back to the entrance. Value. That was always the word. Increase value. Protect value. Maintain value. Funny how that word always seemed to come at someone else's expense. I stayed quiet long enough for her to believe the conversation was over. Then I turned and walked back toward my house, gravel crunching under each step, steady and unhurried. Inside, I closed the door behind me and let the silence settle. No more engine noise. No more voices. Just the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the faint rustle of paper still spread across my table. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. A licensed surveyor. The same company my father had used years ago. I did not call immediately. I just stared at the name for a second, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. Because once I made that call, this would stop being a quiet mistake and start becoming something official. Something documented. Something that could not be undone with a smile and a clipboard. I set the phone down for a moment and looked back out the window toward that half-finished entrance. The stone, the symmetry, the confidence in every line they were building. They thought they were creating something permanent. I took a slow breath, reached for the phone again, and this time I pressed call. Because if they wanted to build on my land, the least I could do was let them finish. The surveyor showed up at 7:12 a.m., right when the air still carried that damp, metallic chill before the sun burned everything clean. His truck rolled in slow, tires crunching over gravel like it had done this 1,000 times before, which it probably had. No drama. No urgency. Just routine. That was exactly what I needed. He stepped out, clipboard in hand, boots already dusted with red Texas dirt, and gave me a short nod. You Ethan? I nodded back. Fence line dispute, I said. He did not ask anything else. He did not need to. Guys like him could read a situation just by looking at the ground. He walked straight to the fence without waiting for directions, crouching near the base of one of the new posts. His fingers brushed the soil, then he glanced up, scanning the alignment, the spacing, the angle. I watched his expression shift just slightly, not surprise, just recognition. Like he had seen this kind of move before. They did this recently, he said. Not a question. Last night, I replied. He let out a quiet breath through his nose, then stood up and pulled out his equipment. Tripod. Level. Measuring rod. Everything precise. Everything deliberate. The kind of work that does not care about opinions, only facts. I stayed back, hands in my pockets, letting him do his job. The soft click of metal locks, the faint hum of calibration, the occasional scrape of boots against dirt filled the silence. Across the road, construction had already started again. Engines idling. Workers moving stone. The entrance was taking shape fast now. Too fast. Like they were racing towards something they did not realize was waiting for them. The surveyor took his first reading, then another, moving methodically along the line. Each measurement tightened the invisible boundary that Rebecca thought she had already erased. I could feel it happening even without looking at his notes. That line was coming back. Not physically yet, but on paper. And paper was where it mattered. About 20 minutes in, he stopped near the front corner. The same spot I had traced the day before. The same spot where their entrance now stood just a little too far to the right. He adjusted the instrument, leaned in, checked the numbers again. Then he straightened up slowly. "Well," he said, almost to himself. I walked over, stopping beside him. "What is it?" He tapped the top of the tripod lightly, like he was confirming what he already knew. "Your line does not stop at that fence," he said. "It runs straight through that." He nodded toward the entrance. I followed his gaze. The right pillar. The one sitting on freshly turned soil. The one that looked just a little too perfect in its new position. "How far?" I asked. He flipped a page on his clipboard, scribbled something down, then looked up again. "About 4 feet into your property. Maybe a little more, depending on final grading." 4 feet. Not 6. Not the whole thing. Just enough. Just enough to make it a problem they could not ignore. I let that number settle in my head, heavy and solid. Because that was the kind of detail that did not argue. It did not shout. It just existed. The surveyor packed up slowly. No rush, like he knew this was only the beginning. "I will have the official report ready by tomorrow," he said. "Stamped, signed, all of it." I nodded. "I need it clean," I said. "No gray areas." He gave a small, almost amused smile. Lines like this are never gray. When he drove off, the sound of his engine faded into the background noise of construction. I stood there alone again, looking at that entrance. Workers were lifting another stone into place, adjusting it carefully, making sure everything lined up just right. They had no idea they were building across a line that had just been redrawn back into existence. I reached down and picked up a small chunk of loose limestone from the edge of the site, turning it over in my hand. Smooth on one side, rough on the other, like most things that looked finished until you examined them closely. Across the road, Rebecca stepped out of her golf cart again, watching the progress with that same satisfied posture. She caught my eye for a second, then looked away, already confident there was nothing left to worry about. I dropped the stone back onto the ground and turned toward my house, the faint dust settling behind me with each step. Tomorrow, everything would be on paper. And once it was on paper, it would not matter how straight their entrance looked. It would only matter where it stood. The report arrived the next morning at exactly 8:03 a.m., sitting in my inbox like something heavier than its file size suggested. I opened it at the kitchen table, the same spot where my father used to spread out maps with a pencil tucked behind his ear, and for a second I could almost hear the scratch of graphite against paper. The document was clean. Sharp lines. Clear measurements. No opinions. Just facts laid out in black and white like they had been waiting years to be read. I scanned down to the section that mattered, the coordinates, the boundary description, the stamped seal at the bottom. Official. Final. Unarguable. 4 feet and 7 inches into my property. That was the number now. Not a guess. Not an estimate. A measurement that carried weight. I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet settle. Around me, the low hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. Outside, I could already hear movement. Engine starting. Doors slamming. Another day of construction across the road. Another day of them building something that did not belong where it stood. I printed 2 copies of the report, the paper warm when it slid into my hand. One for me, one for what came next. By the time I stepped outside, the sun was already climbing, casting long shadows from the half-finished entrance. The stone pillars were nearly complete now, standing taller, more defined, like they had always been there. That was the trick with things built fast and clean. They made people forget what came before. I walked across the road slowly, the gravel giving way to packed dirt, then to the smoother edge of their new construction. A couple of workers glanced up as I approached, then went back to their tasks. They were not the ones I needed to talk to. Rebecca was already there, standing near the left pillar, talking into her phone with that same measured tone she used when she wanted to sound in control. She noticed me before I said anything. You could see it in the way her posture shifted, the way she ended the call just a little quicker than she intended. "Morning," she said, sliding the phone into her pocket like this was just another routine check-in. I held up the folder slightly, not opening it yet. "Got the survey back," I said. Simple. Direct. Her smile did not disappear, but it tightened. Just a fraction. "Oh," she replied, like she was still expecting this to go her way. I opened the folder then, letting the pages catch a bit of the breeze before steadying them with my hand. Boundary line runs right through your entrance, I said, tapping the diagram. 4 feet and 7 inches. For a moment, nothing moved. Not the workers. Not the air. Just that number hanging between us. She stepped closer, reaching for the paper with a confidence that looked practiced. She scanned it quickly, eyes moving faster than her expression could keep up. There it was. The shift. Subtle but real. The kind of shift that happens when someone realizes the ground they are standing on is not as solid as they thought. This must be outdated, she said, handing it back, her voice smooth but a little too quick. We have updated plans on file. I closed the folder slowly, deliberate. County records say otherwise, I replied. No raised voice. No tension. Just another fact. She glanced toward the entrance, then back at me, recalculating. You could almost see the math happening behind her eyes. Cost. Delay. Reputation. None of those numbers were working in her favor anymore. But she was not the kind of person who backed down in front of an audience. Not yet. Even if there is a discrepancy, she said, choosing her words carefully. This is a community improvement. It benefits everyone. I looked past her again at the pillar, the stone perfectly aligned, the edges crisp in the sunlight. It did look good. I would give her that. That was part of the problem. It is sitting on my land, I said. That was all. No argument beyond that. Because there did not need to be. She held my gaze for a second longer, then nodded once, like she was acknowledging something without actually agreeing to it. We will review it, she said finally. With our legal team. Of course she would. That was the next move. Delay. Review. Stretch the process until people forgot why it started. I slipped the folder back under my arm and turned slightly, the conversation already over in my mind. Take your time, I said. I meant it. Because the longer that entrance stayed exactly where it was, the more permanent their mistake became. The more visible. The more undeniable. I walked back toward my house without looking back, the sound of construction resuming behind me, louder now, like nothing had changed. But something had. It just had not caught up to them yet. And that was the part one was counting on. They did not slow down after that conversation. If anything, they sped up. By the next afternoon, the entrance looked almost finished, the stone pillars sealed, the metal sign frame bolted in place, and fresh gravel spread across the widened driveway like a clean slate. The smell of sealant and hot dust hung thick in the air, mixing with the low rumble of trucks pulling in and out like this was already a done deal. That was the part that almost made me smile. Because the more complete it looked, the harder it would be to ignore later. I stayed inside most of that day, not out of hesitation, but out of patience. Papers covered my table now. The survey report, copies of the original deed, county maps printed in high resolution, every line sharp enough to leave no room for interpretation. I spent hours cross-checking everything, not because I doubted it, but because I wanted it airtight. Every number had to match. Every coordinate had to line up. When you are dealing with people who rely on perception, you fight back with precision. Around 3 in the afternoon, a white envelope slid under my front door. No knock. No doorbell. Just that soft scrape of paper against wood that sounded almost polite. I picked it up, already knowing who it was from before I even saw the letterhead. Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. Of course. I opened it slowly, the crisp fold resisting for just a second before giving way. The language inside was exactly what I expected. Formal. Controlled. Carefully worded to sound reasonable while saying very little. They acknowledged the survey. They stated they were reviewing it. They advised that no action should be taken until their internal assessment was complete. And then there it was, tucked neatly into the last paragraph like an afterthought. A reminder that unauthorized interference with community property could result in fines. I read that line twice, letting it settle in. Unauthorized interference. On my own land. I folded the letter back along its original crease and set it on the table, right next to the survey report. Side by side, they looked almost like 2 different realities. One based on facts, the other based on authority. Outside, I could hear laughter. Not loud, just enough to carry. A couple of neighbors had stopped near the entrance, looking at the finished stonework, nodding, impressed. It looked good. That was the problem. Good enough to make people stop asking questions. Good enough to make them forget where it came from. I stepped out onto the porch, leaning lightly against the railing, watching from a distance. Rebecca stood near the new sign frame, talking to someone I recognized from the HOA board. She looked relaxed again, like the moment from yesterday had already been filed away as a minor inconvenience. She caught my eye briefly, then turned back to her conversation without acknowledging me. That told me everything. In her mind, this was already handled, managed, contained. I stayed there for a while, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling into its routine. A car door closing somewhere down the street. A dog barking once, then going quiet. The faint clink of tools being packed away as the last of the workers wrapped up for the day. And right in the middle of it all, that entrance stood there, solid and confident, like it had always belonged. I went back inside as the sun started to drop, the light shifting from bright to gold, stretching shadows across the floor. I picked up the HOA letter again, reading that last line one more time. Unauthorized interference. I let out a slow breath, then reached for my phone. This time, I did not hesitate. I called the county office, the number listed on the surveyor's report. When someone answered, I kept it simple. Property line encroachment. Verified survey. Active construction. I gave him the address. The details. The measurements. No emotion. Just facts. The person on the other end listened, typing as I spoke, the faint clicking of keys echoing through the line. We will open a case and review immediately, they said. Immediate. That was a word Rebecca had not used. I thanked them, ended the call, and set the phone down next to the 2 stacks of paper on my table. The house felt quieter after that. Not empty, just focused, like everything had finally shifted from waiting to moving. I walked back to the window and looked out at the entrance one more time, now lit by the softer glow of evening. It still looked perfect, still looked permanent, but now there was a timeline attached to it. And timelines have a way of catching up to people who think they are already finished. The county truck showed up 2 days later, just after 9 a.m., white paint already dusted with road grit, the official seal on the door catching the sunlight like something that did not need to announce itself to be taken seriously. I heard it before I saw it, that steady diesel hum rolling down the street slower than normal traffic, deliberate, like it knew exactly where it was going. I stepped outside as it came to a stop near the entrance, the engine idling low, almost patient. 2 men stepped out, both in county-issued vests. Clipboards already in hand. No hesitation. No small talk. Just work. That was the difference. Rebecca was there within seconds, like she had been waiting for something but not expecting this. Her heels clicked against the new concrete edge as she approached them, posture straight, voice already shifting into that controlled authority she always used. "Good morning, can I help you?" she asked, like she was still the one in charge of the situation. One of the county officers glanced at her briefly, then back at the entrance, then down at his clipboard. "We received a report of a boundary encroachment," he said, calm, neutral, the kind of tone that does not bend for conversation. I stayed where I was, just off to the side, hands in my pockets, watching the moment unfold without stepping into it. Because this was no longer about me explaining anything. This was about them seeing it for themselves. The second officer walked toward the right pillar, boots pressing into the same loose soil I had noticed days ago. He crouched down, brushing the dirt lightly, then stood and looked toward the street, aligning his view with something only he could see. Invisible lines. The kind that do not care how good something looks once it is built. Rebecca stepped closer, her voice tightening just a fraction. "This structure is fully approved under our community development plan," she said, holding her ground like that would make the words heavier. The first officer flipped a page on his clipboard, then held up a printed copy of the survey. "My survey. The same clean lines. The same numbers. This plan does not override recorded property boundaries," he replied. No emotion, just fact. I could see it hit her then. Not all at once. Not dramatic. Just a slow realization settling in behind her eyes, the kind that shifts everything without making a sound. She looked at the pillar again, then at the paper, then back at the pillar like maybe if she stared long enough it would move on its own. It did not. One of the workers paused nearby, wiping his hands on a cloth, watching quietly. Others slowed down too, the rhythm of the site changing without anyone saying it out loud. Work does not stop because someone tells it to. It stops because something changes. And something had. The second officer stood up and marked something on the ground with a small orange flag, pressing it firmly into the dirt just inches from the base of the pillar. That tiny piece of plastic carried more weight than all the stones stacked above it. "This marks the recorded boundary," he said, almost casually, like he was explaining something simple. But there was nothing simple about it, because now it was visible. Now it was real to everyone standing there. Rebecca's smile was gone now, replaced with something tighter, more calculated. "We will need time to review this," she said again. But this time the words did not carry the same confidence. The first officer nodded slightly. "You will receive a formal notice," he said. "Any structure within this boundary may require removal or relocation pending review." May require. That was how they said it. Calm. Controlled. But everyone there understood what it meant. I shifted my weight slightly, gravel crunching under my boots, just enough for Rebecca to glance in my direction again. This time, she did not look away immediately. There was something different in her expression now. Not defeat. Not yet. But awareness. The kind that comes right before everything starts to unravel. The county officers finished their notes, took a few photos, then walked back to their truck without another word. No threats. No arguments. Just documentation. And then they were gone. The engine fading down the road the same way it arrived, steady and certain. The site stayed quiet for a moment after that, like everyone was waiting for someone to say what came next. No one did, because the answer was already there, planted in the dirt next to that pillar. I turned and walked back toward my house, the air feeling different now, lighter in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. Behind me, the entrance still stood exactly where it had been. Solid, impressive, and officially in the wrong place. The notice arrived the following morning, taped to a bright orange board staked directly into the ground beside the pillar, impossible to miss and even harder to ignore. I saw it before I even stepped off my porch, that sharp block of color cutting through the neutral tones of stone and gravel like a warning sign that did not need to explain itself. The air was still, heavy with that early morning quiet where every small sound carries farther than it should. A distant car door, a bird cutting across the sky, and right there in the center of it all, that notice standing like a line drawn in plain sight. I walked across the road slowly, the gravel crunching under each step, my eyes fixed on the paper pinned to the board. The edges fluttered slightly in the breeze, but the text was clear. Official. Direct. It stated what everyone already knew but had not said out loud until now. Boundary encroachment confirmed. Review pending. Structure subject to corrective action. No emotion. No argument. Just the kind of language that turns a situation into a process. A couple of neighbors had already gathered a few feet away, standing just close enough to read but far enough to not feel involved. I recognized them. People who usually kept to themselves, who nodded in passing but never asked questions. Today, they were reading every line. Quiet. Curious. Watching. That was new. Rebecca arrived a few minutes later, faster than usual, her steps sharper, more controlled. She stopped in front of the notice, reading it once, then again, like maybe the words would change if she looked long enough. They did not. I stayed off to the side, leaning lightly against the edge of the gravel, letting her have that moment. Because this was no longer something she could smooth over with a conversation. This was visible now. Public. "This is a temporary measure," she said finally, turning toward the small group like she was addressing a meeting instead of a handful of neighbors. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it now. Pressure. "We are working with the county to resolve a minor discrepancy." Minor discrepancy. That phrase hung in the air, lighter than the situation it was trying to describe. One of the neighbors glanced at the pillar, then back at the notice, then at Rebecca. No one said anything. They did not need to. The scale of the stone compared to the word minor did not match. Rebecca's eyes flicked toward me for a split second, just long enough to acknowledge that I was there, then back to the notice. For the first time since this started, she did not look like she had already decided the outcome. She looked like she was calculating, adjusting, trying to find a way to keep control of something that was already shifting out from under her. I pushed off the gravel and walked up to the board, close enough to read the fine print without leaning in. The county seal sat at the bottom, stamped in ink that had not even fully dried yet. That detail mattered more than anything else. Fresh. Active. Not something that could be filed away and forgotten. I nodded once, more to myself than anyone else, then stepped back. Across the entrance, the workers had not resumed yet. Tools rested where they had been set down the day before. Buckets of mortar sat untouched. The whole site felt paused, like it was waiting for permission that had not come. A truck pulled up at the far end of the street, slowing as it approached the entrance, the driver's eyes lingering on the notice before continuing on. That was how it spread. Not through announcements or meetings, but through moments like that. Small pauses, double takes, questions that did not need to be asked out loud. Rebecca turned slightly, addressing no one in particular. "We will handle this," she said, softer now, more to herself than to anyone else. I believed her. She would try. People like her always did. But handling something and controlling it are not the same thing. I took one last look at the pillar, at the clean stone, the precise edges, the way it caught the light just right. It still looked perfect. That had not changed. What had changed was what stood next to it. A simple board, a sheet of paper, and a line that could no longer be ignored. I turned and walked back toward my house, the sound of my steps steady against the gravel, the air carrying that same quiet as before, but heavier now with something else. Not tension, not even conflict, just inevitability settling in, slow and certain, like it had been there all along waiting for someone to notice. The first truck rolled in just after sunrise 3 days later, not loud, not aggressive, just steady and official, the kind of presence that does not ask for attention but takes it anyway. I was already outside when it arrived, leaning against the porch railing with a cup of coffee that had gone cold 15 minutes earlier. The air felt different that morning, cooler, like the heat had pulled back just enough to let something else move in. The truck stopped near the entrance, tires settling into the gravel with a low crunch that echoed farther than it should have. Behind it came a second vehicle, smaller, marked with the same county seal I had seen on the notice. Doors opened. Boots hit the ground. Clipboards came out. No rush. No hesitation. Just the next step in a process that had already been set in motion. Across the road, Rebecca appeared again, faster this time, her movements sharper, less composed than before. She walked straight toward them, not waiting for an introduction, not waiting for context. "We are still in review," she said before anyone could speak, her voice firm but carrying that edge that had not been there before. The lead officer glanced at her briefly, then unfolded a document from his clipboard. The paper caught the morning light, the seal at the bottom darker, heavier than the rest. "Review has been completed," he said. Simple. Final. No extra words. That was all it took. I could feel the shift even from where I stood. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just something settling into place that had been moving toward this point the entire time. Rebecca did not respond immediately. She looked at the paper, then at the entrance, then back at the paper like she was trying to find a version of reality where those two things matched. They did not. The second officer walked toward the pillar again, stopping right beside the orange marker that had been placed days earlier. He measured something quickly, noted it down, then stepped back. "Encroachment confirmed," he said, more to the clipboard than to anyone else. The lead officer nodded once, then looked at Rebecca again. "You will need to relocate any structure within the recorded boundary," he said. "Not remove. Not destroy. Relocate." The word landed clean. Precise. Like everything else they had said. Rebecca's posture changed then, just slightly, her shoulders tightening, her stance narrowing like she was holding something in place that wanted to slip. "That is not feasible," she replied, her voice controlled but thinner now. "This is a completed installation." The officer did not react. "That does not change the boundary," he said. And that was it. No argument. No escalation. Just the same line being drawn again, this time out loud. Behind them, a couple of neighbors had gathered again, closer now, not pretending they were just passing by. They watched in silence, eyes moving between the officers, the entrance, and Rebecca. This was no longer background noise. This was something happening in the open. I stepped off the porch and walked toward the road, slow, steady, not inserting myself into the conversation, just closing the distance enough to see it clearly. The stone pillar looked exactly the same as it had yesterday. Solid, clean, perfect. That had not changed. What had changed was what stood around it. The officers, the papers, the line. Rebecca glanced at me again, and this time there was no dismissal in her eyes. No confidence, just recognition. The kind that comes when someone realizes the situation has moved beyond them. The lead officer folded the document back onto his clipboard. "You will receive a formal timeline for compliance," he he said. Until then, no further modifications should be made. Rebecca nodded slowly, but it was not agreement. It was calculation. She was already thinking ahead, trying to find angles, options, ways to shift the outcome. But some outcomes do not shift. They arrive. The officers returned to their vehicles without another word, engines starting up in that same steady rhythm as before. The trucks pulled away, leaving behind the entrance exactly as it was, but no longer what it had been. The site stayed quiet for a long moment after they left. No tools moved. No voices filled the space. Just the faint sound of wind brushing against stone. I stopped at the edge of the gravel, looking at the pillar one more time, then at the orange marker beside it. 4 feet and 7 inches. That was all it took. Not a lot of land. Not something most people would even notice. But enough. Enough to move everything that came after. I turned and walked back toward my house, the coffee still in my hand, now completely cold, and for the first time since this started, I knew exactly how this was going to end. The deadline came exactly 7 days later, printed in bold at the top of the official notice that arrived by certified mail, the kind you have to sign for, the kind that makes everything feel heavier the moment it touches your hand. I opened it at the same kitchen table, the same spot where this whole thing had started to take shape, and read it once, then again, not because I did not understand it, but because I wanted to feel the weight of it settle in completely. Compliance required. Structure to be relocated beyond recorded boundary. Timeline: 72 hours from receipt. 72 hours. 3 days to undo something they had spent weeks building. I folded the paper carefully and set it down, the edges lining up perfectly with the survey report that had started this chain reaction. Outside, the entrance stood exactly as it had the day before. Clean, solid, confident. But now it had a clock attached to it. By midday, the first signs of change appeared. Not dramatic, not loud, just small shifts. A truck parked a little closer than usual. Workers standing in groups instead of moving stone. Voices lower, more focused. The rhythm was gone. In its place was something slower, more careful. I stepped out onto the porch, the heat already building in the air, pressing down on everything like it wanted to hold the moment in place. Across the road, Rebecca stood near the pillar again, phone in hand, pacing in short, controlled steps. No smile this time. No performance. Just movement. She was still trying to manage it, still trying to find a way to keep control of something that had already moved beyond her reach. I watched as a crew arrived later that afternoon, different from the ones before. Heavier equipment. Larger trucks. The kind that do not build. The kind that adjust. One of the operators stepped out, looked at the pillar, then at the ground marker, then back at the pillar again. That same alignment. That same invisible line now dictating everything. They did not start right away. There was a pause. A moment where everyone seemed to acknowledge what was about to happen without saying it out loud. Then, slowly, methodically, the process began. Not destruction. Not chaos. Just careful reversal. Stone by stone. Piece by piece. The same precision that had put it there now working in the opposite direction. I stayed where I was, leaning against the railing, the faint smell of dust and warm metal drifting across the road as the first section shifted. It was subtle at first, almost unnoticeable unless you knew exactly what to look for. The angle changed. The alignment adjusted. That perfect symmetry they had built so confidently started to drift, just enough to catch the eye. Rebecca stood off to the side now, no longer directing, no longer speaking, just watching. Her posture was still straight, still composed, but the certainty was gone. In its place was something quieter. Recognition. By the second day, the entrance looked different. Not broken, not ruined, just off. The right pillar had been moved back, just beyond that invisible line, leaving the entire structure slightly angled compared to the road. The gravel path had been reshaped to match, but it no longer flowed the way it had before. Cars slowed as they approached, drivers adjusting instinctively to something that no longer felt natural. Neighbors noticed. You could see it in the way they glanced at it, the extra second they took as they passed through. Nothing had been removed entirely. It was all still there, just not the way it had been intended. On the third morning, I walked out to the fence line again. The original posts were back where they belonged, set firmly into the ground, straight and true, the way they had always been. I ran my hand along the top rail, feeling the smooth wood under my palm, the faint warmth from the sun already settling in. Across the road, the entrance stood in its new position, functional, complete, but permanently altered. Not because of force, not because of conflict, but because of a line that had always been there, waiting to be acknowledged. I looked at it for a long moment, then back at the fence, then at the ground between them. 6 feet had started this. 4 feet and 7 inches had ended it. I turned and walked back toward the house, the gravel crunching under my boots, steady and familiar. Behind me, the neighborhood continued like it always did. Cars passing, doors opening, life moving forward. But every time someone drove through that entrance, they adjusted just slightly, steering around something they could not quite explain. And that was the part that stayed. Not the argument, not the paperwork, just the quiet reminder, built into the shape of it all, that land does not move for people who think they are in control. People move for the land.